Okay, welcome to hashtag Ask GMBN Tech, where you get to ask us questions. Hopefully we can answer them. So let's begin.
Okay, my first question is from user 43feather, I don't know. And he says, or she says, how does the saddle setback, brackets aligning knee with pedal, work with steeper seat angles on modern bikes? Moving the saddle back effectively slackens the seat tube angle, negating the supposed climbing benefits. I see where you're going with this one here, because yes, seat angle and also the saddle fore and aft is both trying to effectively get, well, the effective seat or saddle position right, and balance and climbing is definitely one of them. So you have different seat angles to try and effectively balance a rider in the center of a bike for climbing mainly, or for seated riding. And you know, different bikes and different genres go about that in different ways because the climbing is often different. So for example, on a cross-country bike, your climbs might be technical and you may need to be balanced in a different way to, say, enduro, where a lot of it is what I call winch and plummet, which is going up steep, consistent fire roads where your balance might need to be way further forward, or your saddle might need to be way further forward in order to balance you on that steep climb. Now the saddle fore and aft will, yes, it will negate some of that, but I like to think of it more as fine tuning. So obviously a saddle is on a diagonal line here. So if you are outside of the norms or the averages that the bike manufacturer have predicted for their ride, if you're way up here, then your saddle is going to be much further back than the bike manufacturers expected. And equally, if you've got really short legs like myself and your seat post comes way down, then your saddle is actually going a lot further forward. So you may need to fine tune just a little bit to intentionally negate what they've done with that angle to get it balanced for you, but also to get your knee aligned with the pedal, as you say, because that's kind of an ergonomic thing. It gives you good power and it also gives you good comfort and hopefully won't lead to further injuries. So long answer, but they both do the same thing in slightly different ways for slightly different reasons.
Great question here from Ryan. Effectively, he's asking, what is eBike certified? Is it just a load of baloney? Is it made up? He's crashed loads. Come on. And it's a really good question because it does pop up. And yeah, some brands aren't great at defining what are standards, but there are some really good standards out there. It's called the ASTM standards. And there's like 5 categories essentially, from sort of, riding a very light trail. You could say flat bar gravel, but we know gravel is a sort of trigger word for some of you, all the way up to kind of category 5 bikes, whereby it's sort of double black diamond trail, so with really big drops. And what's great about this standard is it's telling you sort of, A, telling you as a consumer, and B, it's also telling the brands what specification they have to build the bike to in terms of strength and resistance, and specifically to drops and things like that, and occasional use. So, you know, you could have a category 4 bike, which it might have quite a long travel, but isn't actually designed for hardcore enduro or hardcore bike park life. So you just have to be careful about it. Now, related to that, there is an e-bike version of this category as well. So an example would be the Canyon Torque On, which is their burlier bike, is a Cat 5e for e-bike version. So you could go, full black diamond trails. It's like a full gnarly bike for lots of jumps and everything. Whereas the Neuron On Fly, which is a bit of a mouthful, but apparently a very nice bike, is only a category 3 e-bike. So it's more like a trail e-bike. So there is a tighter level of terrain that you can sort of like tackle on the different categories. Those same ATSM standards, I think I've mixed it, but is it ATSM, I think, standards also apply to components as well. So it's sort of filtering slowly into components, but it is there too. Now, helmets are an interesting one because I think you just sort of mentioned about how, you know, you've smashed your head on downhills before, but hopefully you haven't smashed it badly. They're not to be joked about. Essentially, there is a work in progress for e-bike helmets and what e-bike certified helmets mean. And that's because there is a new type, at least in Europe, of category of e-bike, which is the Speed Pedelec. So effectively, there's still a pedal assist bike, So we're not talking throttles. We know in America there's 3 classifications of e-bike, one of them being throttled, so you don't actually have to pedal. But this new test for these e-bike standards is coming out of Holland or the Netherlands. So it's the titled NTA 8776. And it's designed for these high speeds, so it's rated up to 45 kph versus all the other helmets, e-bike or non-e-bike, which are only rated to 25 kph. Hopefully it means that you can get more insights as to when something is more protective. Yeah, I think it's a good thing. Let us know in the comments.
So my question is from Craig Best. He says, I usually keep my full suspension bike in a bike stand when it's not being used. Is there any disadvantage to this? Technically, no. It depends where you're holding it from. So, you know, if it's being hooked on to the frame, maybe not. I think it should be able to withstand that. Although, yeah, I'd sort of, if it was being clamped by, say, the dropper post, I'd be a little bit more wary of that. So if you were clamping your dropper post, for example, and the whole bike and the weight of it was pulling this down, some dropper posts can pull some air into the system from that sort of action or prolonged, you know, pulling it out sort of motion is not so great. So I'd be wary of that. But I personally don't think, I think a bike should be able to hang in a stand by its frame. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it depends on the time, I think. So if you're leaving it hang for a long, long time, then yeah, sometimes, yeah, if you've got any air in, well, any of the systems, any of the hydraulic systems, that could migrate into places that you don't want it. So yeah, something to be mindful of with that. But essentially, modern bikes are pretty good now. So I think it should be fine, yeah.
Okay, my next question is from Zzz, who says, are there seats with a spring to help with physical recovery? Watched a video with a Zing Ping in it some time ago, and basically he's hurt his coccyx and wants to, he's struggling to get back into it, so he wants some help. Yeah, there's a couple, so I don't actually know what the Zing Ping is. I couldn't find it. I assume it was kind of a suspended saddle. Now, there have been some out there. In fact, this one's a pretty good example. This is an Ergon SMC Core and is e-bike specific, and they use some kind of like high density foam, would you call that? I think
it's actually low density. It's like an expanded
low density foam. I do apologise. That give some sort of give and comfort in order to take out some of the vibration damping as well, and not be so harsh. Gives you a little bit of flexibility, not in your body, but in your sort of movements. There are others out there. SQ Labs brought something out that had sort of inserts that went into the back, almost like sort of rubber or elastomer inserts that allowed to give more give or less give. And they also have one that is specific for coccyx relief. So coccyx is your tailbone, and SQ Labs have a kind of stepped saddle, which is supposed to raise you a little bit in order to relieve the pressure on the tailbone, which goes underneath your pelvis. But my biggest advice to you is to have a saddle that is fitted to you properly, because if your sit bones, or effectively the pointy bits of your pelvis, are supported correctly on a saddle, they're not rolling either side because the saddle's too narrow, that sort of thing can create a lot of pressure on the coccyx and the tailbone that goes in between. So do make sure, because you're suggesting you need to go out and buy something, the first thing I would do is get fitted up, because it's whether you're injured or not, this is a good investment. Go get fitted up for a saddle, get a saddle that fits you perfectly, and talk to the bike shop owners about the different positions that you can ride in to relieve the pressure on the coccyx, and also the different sort of gel options out there to give you some support. And also there are, if you're looking at more suspension, there are seat posts that have suspension in them too, which will give you a little bit of spring. I use an Ergon CF All-Road, which is a rigid post, but it's kind of like a leaf spring. I had it on my Canyon Exceed XC bike last year, and it was so comfortable because you could effectively pedal over bumps and it would give you a little bit of give and it would sort of bounce. And I found that to be really comfortable and also really good for riding over rough terrain without sort of feeling jarred. So something like that may help you. And if you find something that works out, let us know down in the comments below, because this will obviously help a lot of other people out there too.
Right, great question here from Scott Forrest, which is a real name, it's not made up. It's a great name. So he's talking about dirt bike or motorbikes, as in motocross, moto enduro. Tyre knobs, especially on the front, have largely remained the same for decades. Why are mountain bikes so different? When will moto adopt all the different things that we've got with mountain bike? Lug placement and tread design. Because it's easy to spend basically equal money on both. Okay, first, I'm not a moto nerd, but I think these are probably some of the reasons why. So, moto trials, motocross, moto enduro, visually, I'm sure they've stayed really similar, but I suspect what's happening is inside, like the carcass, the compound, the actual tech inside is definitely changing. I know on sort of like some of the e-bike tyres from Pirelli, they're using the moto technology and moto tread design to influence their mountain bike tyres. So I think there is some crossover that potentially we can't see. I guess the bigger thing also is that they've got really good suspension, and it's not necessarily that suspension is any better than the Fox or RockShox that we've got. It's more that the balance between unsprung mass and sprung mass is so much better on a motorbike, because you've got that engine, you've got that fuel tank, you've got a lot of mass versus your mass on a push bike, where even if you're a really light rider, that will outweigh some of the unsprung mass. So it means setup on those bikes and thus traction on motorbikes can be much simpler and much easier, and it's easier to generate more traction. I guess on that traction thing and engines as well, if you've got an engine, well, you can kind of forgo some of the fast rolling requirements that as human powered, and even on the e-bikes, we need to have a fast rolling tyre. And on a motorbike, yes, it's useful if you're a racer, but just out and out traction is the key thing. So, I mean, final point of why the moto tyres are going to be different to ours is that, well, if you're a racer or even if you're kind of doing enduro, I have seen lots of folks at moto events cutting tyres. So using not clippers, but a special heated sort of guide that basically trims the edge. So you can use it to cut the braking edge or the accelerating edge, and you have a really crisp, sharp, well, you're recutting the tread knob effectively, so it gets a lot of bite. And whilst I know I've done it at World Cups in the past, I know World Cup racers are still doing it, we've got so much variety in tyres that, well, we probably don't need to.
Well, I think we do, but I think the key is that the variety meets the different genres as well. Whereas when you mention motocross is one genre of motorbikes, whereas, mountain biking is not one genre. It's, there's cross country, there's enduro, and all of those require different things. Like I used to race motocross a couple of years ago to a very low standard, but the tracks are largely the same. You're either on hard pack and dry, or you're on loose or sand, and I wouldn't have an array of tyres to meet that. Whereas, with my array of bikes that meet cross country or enduro or downhill and, bike parks or, loose woodlands, there is much more variety, and maybe that's why we have that.
Okay, yeah, because we've got to optimise for our output, where you can just lean on that throttle a bit more.
But also just there's not that variety in terrain for motorbikes.
Okay, there we go.
Whereas there is for mountain biking.
Hopefully that answers your question. Let us know in the comments below. Are you a moto head? Are you a petrol head? Do you love motocross? Are you into the motocross?
Yeah, would you like better tread on your motorbike tyres like we do on mountain bikes?
Like the questions, please keep your comments coming. So use the hashtag Ask GMBN Tech to wedge a question on any of the off-road content. So EMBN, GMBN, GMBN Tech, stick it in there and we will find it. We read all the comments. It's really important to us.
And we've got GMBN Tech comments though.
No, you can stick them anywhere and we will find them. So yeah.
Not anywhere.
Yeah, we can. Anywhere off-road, and we will genuinely. There is a Finder app. His name's Mark, but you can find them all.
Sure,
so yeah, put your questions in. They're really important to us because we like helping you get a better experience on the trail. Cool. Okay, we've got a question here, and it's a really good one because he's bought a second wheel set, and he's got a different set of tyres on. So when he goes to, well, let's pretend we go to the bike park. It could be that you've got a trail bike and you want to go cross-country racing, so you've got a different wheel set and different tyres. He's saying, ooh, I've got a new chain, got a new cassette, I'm going to leave the new cassette on one wheel set. And is that a good idea? Are there better options? And my advice is no, please don't do that. And I'll tell you why. Because your chain and cassette are going to match. So what you'll need to do is you'll have to switch that cassette around between those two wheels. And yeah, that's just the best way. Switching the cassette, depending on your free hub, and if it's the same between the two, you might be able to get away with just pulling the cassette and free hub off. Be careful if there's little paws and little springs, because they often do fire under heavy, immovable objects when you do that. But you might just be able to switch them. Otherwise, you can get the vice whips and chain whip style tools that make switching cassette actually really easy. It's not as kind of painful or stressful as it used to be. And yeah, I think that's the best way around it, because that will maximise your chain life and your cassette life. Whereas if you switch between a brand new cassette, older chain and older cassette, essentially you're just going to wear out your new cassette really quickly, because the length and the kind of shape of the rollers will just eat through the new cassette. So it matches the old worn out cassette. Hopefully with this system also you'll be able to just refresh chains more regularly, so get a chain checker. And final thing that you might need to do, if they're different hubs, you might have to double check the rear mech position. So double check the kind of upper and lower limit screws, because what can sometimes happen, it can only be like a fraction of a mil out, but that's enough to put your rear mech through your fancy new rear wheel. So double check those, double check the spacing. And it's probably a good idea, double check the indexing before you head out on the ride with the new wheels. But yeah, great idea, love it. What are your thoughts on having dual wheels for dual purposes?
But yeah, anyway, that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you so much for your questions. And if you have any burning questions right now, use hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments right now so that we can answer it on our next show. But thank you for watching. Bye.